Good afternoon, everyone. We're just letting folks in from the waiting room here, so we'll start. We'll wait just a minute until we get everyone in here, and then we'll be underway. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we'll have some other folks joining us as we go along. I'm Dave Carter with the Flowery Hill Institute, along with my fellow regional director, Chris Roper. And we're really pleased to have three subject experts with us today that can help unwrap some of the mysteries of HACCP plans. You'll notice that we didn't entitle this roundtable HACCP Made Simple. We just said HACCP with less hassles because we know it is a difficult process, but it's very important. And so before we get started here, I'd like to let you know who we have on here. Well, first of all, let me take care of a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this roundtable, and so it will be on our website and our toolkit. And so anyone that wasn't able to join us today, if you're visiting with them, they'll be able to download this and look at this information. Also, we will be sending out a questionnaire after this. It's simply a two-question questionnaire. First of all, what did you think of our session today? And secondly, what are some ideas or some thoughts you might have on roundtables we could have moving forward? We've got a couple in the queue. We'll talk about at the end of this roundtable. But we'd like your thoughts on what you'd like to see covered. So with that, I'm going to have Nikki throw up a little slide here that kind of talks about some of this. These are just some headlines that have been in the news in the last few weeks about listeria recall and causing 3 deaths along with a lot of illness, and E. coli in some ground meat. And then above and beyond that, foreign materials in those. Those are all issues that can threaten the livelihood of a meat or poultry processor when products get into the marketplace. So you can go ahead and take that down, Nicole. So what I want to do is I'm going to give a very brief introduction of the folks that are with us. We've got Abby Davidson, who is with the American Association of Meat Processors. We call her the regulatory guru for AMP. She loves all things regulatory. Dr. Darius Burnett, who is with Mississippi State University, but also is an adjunct professor with Tuskegee University, which is one of our partners. And then Dr. Robert Maddock with the American Meat Science Association. So each of them kind of bring a different perspective. I'll have them introduce themselves a little bit more when we throw them there some questions. But Chris, you've kind of lived HACCP plans in a past life, so any thoughts you want to share before we get started?
No, thank you all for being with us. We see a lot of familiar names. We appreciate you all participating in our events, and we do these for you. So this year specifically, as we deal with a lot of plants that are implementing grants, you're starting up new plants, maybe you're adding on to your facility and doing new things. There's been a lot of HACCP questions this year. We refer a lot of you and a lot of these questions to Abby and Rob and Darius, and we wanted to bring them right to you, right in front of you, so you can hear straight from them some of the tips and techniques that you should be looking at. But Dave hit it on the head too. These are real serious issues that we want you to think about when you think about HACCP and various concerns that could happen in your plant. And if you're a new plant owner or someone starting a new plant, you need to take this seriously. We had an earlier conversation today, and this is not sexy work. This is not the work that you think you're signing up for when you want to just cut meat and you want to make some cool products. HACCP is not what you're thinking about, but we all need you to think about it. So, and then that's why all these fine folks are here to help you. So think about it. We want to help you get it set up right and make it something you can manage every day. So think through that, ask good questions and ask a lot of questions. We're all here to help. So thank you all for being with us.
Great, thanks, Chris. So Abby, I'm going to start off with you. You can give a little bit more of your background, but the other day you sent some really good information about the evolution of HACCP. So, give folks, HACCP didn't just appear. So a little bit of that, and what are really the goals of a good HACCP plan?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you to Flower Health first off for letting me participate on this panel today. Like they said, I'm Abby Davidson. I'm with the American Association of Meat Processors. There's quite a few familiar faces on the call today, so good to see everybody. We all know what HACCP stands for, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. However, I like my acronym a little better, which is have a cup of coffee and pray, right? It's not a fun conversation. It's not sexy, but you sure got to know what you're doing, and you just sure hope you hit the right spot and maybe you catch your inspector on a good day. So a little bit of background. I'm assuming most of us on this call know where HACCP originated from, but in the 1960s, as a collab between the Pillsbury Company, so your cookie dough, NASA and the US Army labs, they all came together to figure out a way that the astronauts, NASA could send their astronauts to space with safe food that was exempt from microbial contamination, chemical hazards, and then physical contaminants as well. The traditional end product testing methods, they were not sufficient to ensure safety at the level required for space food at that time. And that's where HACCP jumped in and came from. So Pillsbury actually developed the HACCP system, which involves identifying potential hazards in the food production process and then determining the points at which those hazards can be controlled or eliminated, which are our CCPs. Over time, HACCP's become more of a framework for all kinds of organizations all around the world to produce framework for safe food. Any organizations from like the World Health Organization to the Food and Agricultural Organization to the USDA, obviously FDA. A lot of associations and organizations utilize HACCP as a framework so that they can implement safe food protocols for their facilities. So that's where HACCP has started, and it's interesting how it evolves over the years. It's been in play for over 60 years now, and it's really interesting to see HACCP plans from 15, 20 years ago when it really was enforced by USDA in the 1990s, because the thought process varies widely, and the food safety critical thinking has changed in the past 10, 15, 20 years. Even 3 years ago or 5 years ago, we're looking at hazards a lot differently than historically or traditionally we have. A good example of that is if you're a company and you're looking at third-party audits, maybe you have a customer asking you to become SQF certified or BRC certified, we have to start looking at radiological hazards now, which is not something that was implemented by NASA or the Pillsbury Company back in the 1960s. So you have to identify at least that there are no radiological hazards in your process if you want to meet that requirement in the SQF or any really third-party audits that you would try to come under. So there are many goals to a food safety plan, and I think I could probably list out 20. Of course, the main one is to produce safe food, right? So we want to identify hazards and prevent them if possible, and eliminate them at all out of the process if we can. And that, of course, we would do by utilizing the critical control points there. Remember, if there's a step in a process where the hazard can't be reduced or eliminated or reduced to safe levels, it's not a CCP. So something to remember there. Of course, another goal is to meet regulatory compliance, and that would tie back into the whole goal of producing safe food there, both the regulatory bodies and ourselves. We don't want to get anybody sick. So also, continuous monitoring and verification is another goal. So just proving that you're producing safe food. If you're not documenting anything, it doesn't happen, right? That's the traditional thought process behind if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And that's sort of what we're falling under today, is that the monitoring aspect and the document aspect is incredibly important. And I see a lot more of evidence being used on video cameras, even in establishments, for monitoring or record keeping, especially in the humane handling realm as well. So and really the last big goal I can think of is consumer protection and confidence. Of course, we want to make sure when I go to the store, I want to know that I'm buying food that is safe, that's not going to get me sick, that is not going to take me out of work for 2 weeks. So ensuring that we are producing products in a strong food safety system to bring the consumer confidence level up quite a bit is also another goal. So a little bit of history there, and then a little bit more of the goals or where we're headed with HACCP and the food safety methodology looking forward.
Great. Thank you, Abby. And Rob, yeah, a little bit of your background, but also when we talked the other day, you mentioned that you don't just jump in and write a HACCP plan. There's some prep work that can really help folks out. So why don't you illuminate on that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I'm Rob Maddock with the American Meat Science Association, previously a professor at North Dakota State and South Dakota State University for quite a while. Been in this position for a couple of years. I always joke as I would teach HACCP many times did several times with my brother. I kind of lost count, probably taught HACCP short courses somewhere north of 75, 80 times over the past 25 years. And I find that I really enjoy it. And that leads me into some of the before you start and jump right into writing a HACCP plan, because it may seem a little overwhelming. I very believe the most important thing, or one of the really important things that you do first, is you have to have one person in your facility or in your establishment has to be HACCP trained. That's a regulatory requirement. If you do not have somebody HACCP trained, you're starting a new business, you're going from custom or retail exempt into an inspected space, I would highly encourage you to send your person or attend a face-to-face, in-person HACCP class. If I were to give a strong recommendation, it'd be one that is held at a university or by a trade group. They're not trying to sell you anything else. They're basically there to serve you and will have a lot of expertise. Now, there's a lot of HACCP and food safety businesses that provide HACCP training in many different ways. They all are fine, but I think you'll find that if you go to an in-person training, especially one at a university or a trade group, and one that is focused on meat, you're going to find far and away, you're going to get a lot more utility out of that and more ability to write a HACCP plan when you return back to your own facility. A couple reasons for this. You go to, for example, a university training, it's probably 2 or 2.5 days. There'll be 20, 25 people there, all in similar situations with you, and especially if it's meat focused. During the HACCP training course, if you're doing it face to face and in person, you develop a HACCP plan throughout the course of 2.5 days, and you break into teams and do this. And there's so much learning that goes on in those groups where you may find that you have similar questions, problems with the person sitting next to you may have never met before. The other cool thing about those in-person trainings, and this does happen sometimes on the virtual trainings, but you get instantaneous feedback and instantaneous, I'd say, help from the instructors that are there. A well-run HACCP class, the instructor is bouncing between groups, providing inputs, suggesting where things need to be improved as you work on these HACCP plans throughout these 2.5 days. And then in a good HACCP course, you will present these plans or pieces as you go along. We may present principle one to the entire group. And so you might get to see 3 or 4 different HACCP plans being developed at the same time over 2.5 days. And for many small plants, you may have fresh meat, you may have slaughter, you may have processed, you may have fermented. You might get to see all of these different plans being developed right in front of your eyes with input and correction and editing being done by the instructors. So there's a big push to do it. If you've got the budget and the time, go to an in-person HACCP training. That for me, that's step one. Then you come back, hopefully you got a well-trained person, and you start there, but you don't start writing a HACCP plan. That's not the first thing you do. The first thing you do then is you have to institute a mindset of food safety into your facility, into your establishment. I was there when HACCP was implemented. I was a youngster, but I was certainly involved. And we laughed and joked that the meat industry, whether they were small processors or large processors, were not producing large amounts of unsafe product. Right. There was the occasional thing, and it's gotten better. We've decreased foodborne illness in the meat space a lot over the last 30 years. Uh, but one of the big things that had to happen is it went from a command and control sort of thing from inspection to people really taking on that culture of food safety. You go into a lot of processors now, and that's been ingrained into small and large processors altogether. So that's the kind of the big thing is that we're producing safe food because our friends, family, neighbors are consuming this. So you start there with that culture. Then you start and you need to form a HACCP team. And I understand there's some plants that there's two employees, right? It may be you and your spouse, you and your partner, brother, father, mother. It's hard to think about pulling a team together when there's only two of you, but that's what you got. And you need then to make some time and some space for that. Now, you may have 3 or 4 different people. And the other thing is your HACCP team isn't exclusive to your business. You can contact your extension people, your university folks, the person down the road who maybe has some expertise. Some of this MPPTA network that may not be able to sit on your HACCP teams, but can provide a lot of input. As you form a team, you also have to decide who's in charge. So that's the next part. Got a HACCP team. Who's the coordinator? Who's the person who's ramrodding the thing and getting it all done? Because ultimately there has to be one person in charge. And depending on the size of your business, that person has to have the authority to implement HACCP, implement food safety systems altogether. So you can't grab if you got 8 employees, the person who just walked in off the street said, well, nobody wants the job, you're the HACCP coordinator. And if they ask to set a meeting at Thursday at 3 o'clock, and you tell them, no, you can't do that because we're busy, you'll have to find some other time. If you're going to name a HACCP coordinator, you have to give them some authority to call meetings and spend some money if they need to as well. So now you've got a HACCP team, right? You've got a HACCP trained person, you got a HACCP coordinator. The very first thing that I always tell people you don't start writing a HACCP plan, you write your good manufacturing practices. These are simple, and they get the team together, produce an actual outcome. Good manufacturing practices are things that you're going to do in your facility to ensure safe food. This is like wearing clean clothes, washing your hands, removing jewelry, right? Wearing a head covering. There's lots of them. There's lots of good examples out there, university sites and other places as well. But write these things down, and it gives you, again, it's a start. You're getting some products put on paper. You're working as a team. That's my recommendation. You can knock those out in an hour, maybe a couple hours. The things you want to see in your facility. What do you got for tobacco use? You got a smoking area. Where is employees going to keep their own lunches, their own food? Lots of things to think about, but there's a lot of good examples, a lot of good help. Once your GMPs are in place and you're using them, the next step, in my opinion, and this is the way I teach people, is to write your sanitation standard operating procedures. Okay. These are regulatory for meat plants. They're required. And they have to be in place before your HACCP plan. And so it's another good place to start. Pull your team together. And if your team's 2 of you, that's your team. You're going to sit down for a couple hours. You're going to maybe find some examples, maybe bring in somebody that you might know who can help you, like Abby, if you're an app member or others. And you start writing these sanitation standard operating procedures are the next level because they get more specific. Instead of, for example, saying you have to wash your hands before you enter a processing facility, maybe it's this is how we're going to wash our hands, or this is how we're going to clean the bandsaw. Unplug it, take it apart, right? Remove all the debris, rinse it with warm water, right? Spray it, put cleaner on it, scrub it, rinse it, dry it, put sanitizer on it. Okay. Thing about anything that is a standard operating procedure, it has a specific purpose. It has a assignment of who's going to do it. It has an assignment how often it's going to happen, right? And it probably generates some records. And an SSOP is going to generate records of, yes, we cleaned this piece of equipment properly after we got done using it and before we used it again. Okay. And so this gets you as your HACCP team or your food safety team in the process of writing things now that have processes to them. A little redundant there, but now we're generating records. So we have to have, we're making record forms too. Now we got those things done. Hopefully your HACCP team is functioning. You're starting to work together. Again, could be the two of you. Now you start tackling the big ones, the HACCP. Okay. Now, before you even get into the HACCP plan proper, the very next thing is you have to describe your product, and there's lots of good formats out there and templates for product description, and you do a flow chart. Okay, flow chart is it actually is regulatory, I believe, for USDA. If you're an FDA plant, it's not, but I don't. That's a weird thing that changes between the two inspection systems. But you're gonna do a flow chart of all the processes in your or all of the steps in your process, whether it's slaughter, making summer sausage, or cutting pork chops. Okay. And ideally you do this in the facility with the clipboard as you're walking around and you decide how things go. Okay. Get your flow chart, verify your flow chart, then you dive into HACCP. So those are the things you got to do that I recommend. I've always trained people to do before you ever start with principle one, which is conduct a hazard analysis. And I think that's leading off from the next thing. But I'll say this about when you develop a HACCP plan, principle one should take more than 50% of the time that you spend writing your HACCP plan. Okay. That's far and away the most key. It's the most important part. It is the most intense, it requires the most input and the most thought. So if you're planning, you got so many hours to work on a HACCP plan, expect that more than half of them will be principle one, which is conduct a hazard analysis, and then you build off of that. But those are the keys that I've found over about a 30-year career here of the best way to start implementing HACCP into your facility as you strive to become either state or federally inspected or to a higher level of food safety.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you, Rob. That was really helpful. In fact, it kind of made me tired listening to all of those steps. But before I throw it over to Darius, I forgot to mention as we go along here, those of you that are attending, if you have a question, be sure and type that into the Q&A. Nicole will be kind of monitoring that. Chris and I'll be looking at it. And after we get done with our discussion, we'll field as many of those questions as we can. So Darius, so much of our work is focused on the red meat side. I know you've done a lot of work with poultry producers through the year. So, and first of all, a little bit of your background and some of the unique things that you found in with folks producing HACCP plans in your area.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks to Flower Hill for inviting me to be part of this roundtable. Again, this is a very appropriate topic, very timely topic, and it's something that continues to persist as a, I would say, potential barrier for small and very small or very low volume processors just trying to wrap their hands and heads around HACCP and how to implement that in their plant. So I am Darius Burnett. I'm an associate professor of meat science and muscle biology, and also the director of the Tuskegee University MPPTA program. And so in that role, obviously, we serve as part of the technical assistance network in providing outreach and technical assistance to small and very small processors as they seek to build, expand, and or improve on their operations. And so as an academic, I get the opportunity to interact with a lot of students in our meat processing facility here on campus. And part of that process twice a year is to introduce our students to our HACCP plan. And so, again, as we talk about HACCP, and whether that's in poultry or in red meat, I like to think of it in terms of the 5 Ps, and Rob already kind of alluded to several of those, but those include familiarity with your plant. So the understanding that the HACCP plan is plant specific, and it's not something that's transferable from plant to plant. It's also not a cookie cutter type of document that you're going to just simply pull one off the internet, because again, it's very specific to your plant. The next P is process. And so again, Rob talked about understanding the processes that are unique to your plant, your flow chart, your products. So the third P is products. And then also the last two involve more of the human element, right? So plant processed products, those are kind of things that are pre-decided. Your floor, your layout, all those things are kind of predetermined. The processes are dictated by the equipment and the layout and things like that. And then the products obviously based off of your market. But the last two kind of bring in the human element, and that includes your people, and the pride that you have in your people and your products and your plant and all of the above. And so plant processed products, people, and pride. And so you have to instill those last two, having good people and building those teams, as Rob said, even if it's a team of two, or your HACCP plan is likely to fail, because it has to be a living, breathing document that is brought to life by the employees and the personnel in the plant. And they have to take pride in the plan itself and in the products that are produced. And so again, you can imagine having to teach that to a group of students who, again, are just trying to get their grade for the semester. And so, you know, their pride is in whether it's an A or a B, not necessarily in what the products are coming out. But, you know, that's how they kind of come in. But by the end of the semester, again, it's a work in progress or a constant process to instill that pride in our students. And so by extension, in addition to working with students, I also have the opportunity to work with lots of small and very small processors who are either established or getting into the industry, and some of those include poultry processors. And again, while there's no simple way to address HACCP with any species, the poultry people are particularly constantly under the gun, I would say, in terms of HACCP, and just because of the nature of some of the foodborne illnesses and things that arise or that are typically associated with poultry. And so, in fact, the USDA just in the last couple of months, first in May, and then actually just August 7th, they just released their proposed plan for a new rule regarding salmonella in poultry carcasses and poultry poultry products. And so that includes, again, a further reduction of the presence of salmonella. Or the first, again, in May, they essentially classified salmonella, the presence of salmonella in ready to eat breaded products as an adulterant. And that essentially kind of paved the way for some of these subsequent rules, which essentially says that that for certain cereal types, the presence of those cereal types above the 1 CFU essentially constitutes the presence of an adulterant. And so for those who are in the small and very small processing industry, poultry processing, that presents even greater challenges, because again, when you talk about monitoring and verification and how to be in compliance with those new rules as they come down the line, many times our larger conglomerates or larger plants are able to kind of be more nimble and institute processes, equipment, et cetera, to be able to meet that compliance. Whereas the smaller individuals, again, have a bigger barrier. Now, as a part of instituting these rules, there's proposals to, again, because there's additional microbial testing and things like that involved, there are resources where that microbial testing and those lab fees would be covered for plants that are classified as small or very low volume. But again, it does provide another barrier, an entry barrier and a sustainability barrier to maintain or to stay in the arena when the rules are constantly changing. And so in particular, when it comes to poultry, again, salmonella, we all know, is the #1 foodborne illness when it comes to humans, and the CDC kind of classifies that. And poultry, for fair or not, accounts for about a quarter of that, 23% or so of the foodborne illnesses are related, or salmonella related foodborne illnesses are as a result of poultry products. And it's not always that the industry or the processors are not doing a good job. In fact, when we talk about the presence or prevalence of salmonella, we've seen a steady decrease in terms of the prevalence or presence of salmonella. What we have not seen is a concomitant decrease in foodborne illnesses from salmonella. And so in order to address that, the burden in many cases have been shifted back to the processor and not necessarily to the end consumer. So essentially the processor can do everything on their end to reduce those things, but then once it gets home to the consumer, if they're not handling and or cooking those products right, and end up with foodborne illness, again, the blame, for better or for worse, can often be laid upstream. And so a lot of it has to do with post-processing and handling, but to reduce that burden, some of these rules are being put in place to kind of minimize the share of the burden that the consumer ultimately carries. And so again, as a poultry processor, definitely choppy waters to navigate. But again, given the severity of some of the illnesses that are associated with it, is something that is a necessary evil.
Great. I appreciate it. Thank you, Darius. And I know we had one question come in about resources here, and we'll get to that toward the end of the of this. And we'll also be putting some of those online too, associated with this. But Darius, you talked about it's not a cookie cutter approach, and I'll throw this out to all of you. But I know there are a lot of templates and things online that kind of seem a fill in the blank type of thing of creating your HACCP plan. And what's the usefulness of those, but what's really the limitation of trying to do a HACCP template?
I guess I'll start. Those templates are absolutely useful. They give you, so you don't have to start from scratch. I think the danger is that people essentially, again, use them as a cookie cutter and try to fill in my product here, fill in the blank type of model. And again, as Rob talked about, when I think about developing a HACCP plan, you think about the Japanese concept of the Six Sigma and the Gemba walk, which means to literally walk where the work is at. And so literally you have to walk the plant, you have to walk the flow chart. And again, what's made online, you may or may not have that same equipment. You may not have those same types of capabilities. Your plant personnel may not be trained the same type of way. And so again, it's all of the 5 Ps together, and it's not simply just pulling a plan off of the internet. Again, they do help you where you don't have to start from scratch, which can also be a daunting task. But it's critical that you customize those plans to your plant and to your processes and your products. Otherwise, again, I've seen people get in a lot of trouble making assumptions and presumptions based off of templates that they're not actually putting, or steps that they're not actually putting into practice in their plants.
Yeah, I'll jump on the end of that statement. So, Dr. Maddock and Darius are both incredibly kind to be on the MPPTA task force to help AMP further develop their HACCP templates. And I'm very thankful to have their knowledge. There's 5 or 6 of us on that committee. And the thing is, we are building those templates, but if you implement them as is, you are going to get NRs. It's just the fact of the matter, because we might reference bison in those plans, or we might reference slaughter in those plans, and you might not have bison in your facility, or you might not slaughter in your facility. So something as simple as that leads to an NR, and it's a justified NR because your HACCP plan is not identifying the appropriate hazards, or one of the 5 Ps like Darius brought up was products. So if you mentioned bison and you don't have bison in your facility, I guess it gives you the option to do that, but there's a chance that you could get a regulatory action because of that. So they're a great place to start. Again, you do not have to reinvent the wheel, but piggybacking on what Darius said, if you don't walk the floor and you just take them as is, you're going to run into problems, especially if you don't take the time to understand it as well. So lots of issues with the cookie cutter aspect.
Right. We talked the other day about some of the things, designing your process and designing your plant. And Chris, I'll have you jump in on this one as well. But, Darius, you'd mentioned that you encourage folks to have smaller lots there, when they're designing their plants. But what are some of the things that folks can do to design what I would call a more HACCP-friendly plant and a more HACCP-friendly process?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I'm sure everyone has an idea on this, but you have to make sure it's something that you can clean and it's something you can manage. A lot of folks start with things that are maybe big and extravagant, and they think they can fill the volume of space if they build that space. But then on the flip side, you can't take care of it, or you can't clean it, or you can't operate everything properly. So, we always try to stress the importance of scale and building a business that you can manage yourself, or with people that you have. In today's environment, with labor seems to be short everywhere, no matter where you're at. It's hard to find good labor, hard to find reliable people. I know everyone on the call probably faces this at one step or another. So knowing the people you have available, knowing the staff size, and knowing what you can manage, I think are extremely important. And building a plant that you can take care of, no different than a home. Do you need a 6,000 square foot home, for you and your spouse? Probably not. You probably don't need a 20,000 square foot plant either, if you're trying to, take care of local foods or provide local foods. Some folks are doing bigger plants, looking at a regional model, or maybe they're going to ship overseas or whatever. But we have to really evaluate what you're doing and make sure it fits what you can manage, what you can handle, and then adapt the HACCP plan accordingly. So we want to help you through all those steps, and make sure that we're setting you up for success. And Dave says it a lot, but we're here for the long term. And we want you to be here for the long term. We don't want to build a building, build a business, and then everyone disappear, or worst case scenario, that business go broke and now the bank owns it. We see that. It's a bad side of the things we get to deal with as well, but it is something that's out there, and we want to help prevent that if we can. So I'll let some other folks chime in on that question too.
I would say with regard to your HACCP plan, it's very important to make sure that, again, anything that you put in that plan, that especially anything that has to be verified, that it's something that you are going to do and your people are trained to do, because you will be held accountable for those things. And so, for example, you talked about lighting. And so if you again, you got to decide what and Chris in the previous conversation talked about risk management. Part of HACCP is obviously managing the the health risks associated, but it's also managing risk that your business is actually incurring. And so making sure that, again, I talk about lighting a lot, and some people will do a whole week's worth of work and call that one lot. And so again, in terms of lighting, how much are you willing to risk is the way I put it. And so if you willing to risk a week's worth of product and do one lot and test that one lot, then again, that's a risk that you have to be willing to take. Some people may overdo it, and they may lot every hour or every 30 minutes. And again, is that something that you can sustain every shift, every day of the week? Because if you put that in your HACCP plan or in your SSOPs that you're going to do those types of steps, then it has to be done, and the USDA or their inspectors are going to hold you accountable to what you put into your plan. And so I always try to think about your plan as a roadmap or your constitution. And again, it's what you are binding yourself to do in the eyes of the regulatory bodies. And so you have to do that, taking into consideration, again, your capacity to fulfill those obligations. Again, so again, some people lot every day, some people lot before lunch and after lunch, some people lot per shift. Again, some people lot per animal, and can consider, if one guy brings in 1 cow and one guy brings in 3 cows, then maybe that customer is a lot. And so again, there's different ways to do that. But again, thinking about what risk am I willing to take on? How much record keeping? How much can I afford to lose, essentially? So if I have to throw away an entire lot, is that an hour's worth of work, or is that a week's worth of work, or a month's worth of work? And so a lot of times when you see some of the larger recalls, a lot of that has to do with record keeping that lapsed for a period of time, or products that were as part of one lot. And so for safety reasons, they'll maybe recall the lot before and the lot after, and the potential suspect lot. And so there's a lot of ways to go about it, but you have to think about your plan as a risk aversion tool, as well as again, obviously the safety implications for your consumers and customers.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Darius, but you brought it up. But you have to understand the financial implications of your policy. So when you look at those lot sizes, and Darius brought it up, but what's the value that you're willing to lose? Because if you do one lot a week and you did 100,000 pounds, you could have to recall that 100,000 pounds if the test was bad, and you're going to pay for that. So can you afford to lose that? And then on the flip side, if you're testing every hour, can you afford to test every hour? Can you afford those tests to reduce your risk? So we can help you understand that and evaluate your risk. But that goes back to our long-term operational costs evaluations that we help you with as well. You know, HACCP plans have a long-term cost of operations. So we need to evaluate that together. And as your team developing those, evaluate the costs of all that together as well. So something to think about.
Bob and Abby, anything to add on that one?
I think it's
So
been
here we
covered
got a
pretty
couple
well.
of questions. What's that?
So I think it's been covered pretty well.
Yeah. So somebody wrote in here, who and how often inspects facilities for compliance with the regulations? What can you expect on who shows up and how frequently?
You know, I'm sure Abby can say it too, and anybody can, but if you're inspected and you're a meat plant, you live with your inspector. I mean, there's a couple of things that, you know, they maybe aren't there 24/7, but you're going to live with your inspector, and so they will be there constantly. If you're doing any sort of slaughter, they're there. If you are making product under inspection, fresh meat, they may or may not be in the facility, but they're going to do a handful of things, whether it's checking your records, going through your pre-op or sanitation. But basically, it's every day. If you are processing, they will be there that day. And when you get your grant of inspection, you get hours. And if you're running one shift, like most small plants are, you're going to get one shift of inspection. Um, there is the opportunity to pay for overtime too if you run long. And then that's one of the things that I think we still have some, or USDA has some dollars to help offset that, hopefully. If you run two shifts, you can get 2 shifts worth of inspection. But again, a lot of small processors aren't going to have that issue. But yeah, if you're a meat inspector, you live with your inspector. And so especially at a small processor, you can develop a really good working relationship with your meat inspector, whether it's a state or a federal inspector, to the point where you really have become a team. And 30 years ago, and even now, I still hear occasionally there's an adversarial relationship between inspection and business. That shouldn't never happen. And I've worked with several dozen inspectors over my life, and eventually we all became teammates and worked together to ensure safe food. It's another a thing, a kind of a culture thing in your business, in your facility. Treat your inspector as part of the team, and they have some authority and they can tell you to do things, but working together is so much easier than maintaining an adversarial relationship.
First one, Joshua wrote in, and this is sort of a walk before you run recommendation. He said, with the time and resource commitment of multiple HACCP categories, I often recommend starting with a single process to become familiar with the FSS expectations. For example, starting with only slaughter established as a retail outlet opportunity and inspection for other fabrication and further processing that can be added later. Just your thoughts on that, starting off with a single and then adding it on.
Yeah, sometimes that can be really beneficial, especially if you're new to the industry and new to learning the methodology or groupthink of your inspection team. Some people they'd rather just take it on all at once, so they would apply for the grant of inspection. They would develop all 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 HACCP plans that they wanted, and get those approved, and then maybe start chipping away at them. So maybe they'd start with livestock slaughter and then have their raw intact and raw not intact plans functioning as well, and then hold off on maybe the heat treated, not fully cooked, not shelf stable, or the heat treated shelf stable plans for those ready to eat products. It's really just dependent on your business model and how much time you can dedicate to learning the methodology. And one of the things that seems to be incredibly helpful, especially in the AMP membership, is we have processors across the country all the time that are willing to open their doors to new people coming into the industry to get a feel for things. So a new person looking to develop HACCP plans or operate a meat plant, they almost get their pick of what state, what town they want to go to. And most of our processors are really good about saying, come on in, I'd love to show you around, show you what it's like. So really just dependent on the group you have, how quickly you need to get up and running, how quickly you need to make money, that kind of thing. So it can be incredibly valuable to focus on one process, but it doesn't always work that way.
One, Emery's talking about have a state inspected plant and now looking at opening up a USDA facility. What are the differences if you have a HACCP plan for your state inspection or as opposed to USDA, if any? Yeah.
So yeah, we depending on how it works, some states are state inspected, some are federal, some have a TA agreement where the state inspectors are there on behalf of the USDA, but your plant is technically a USDA plant. And so in my experience, the HACCP plans themselves, the hazards, the analysis doesn't change. The hazards exist, they exist or they don't, whether regardless of who's doing the inspection. There are in many cases, some state inspectors who may be more versed with the state laws, and there are some state specific laws and things like that if you're only doing state inspection that you may have to adhere to. But the plans themselves, there's not a lot of difference in the plans because again, if you're following the steps as Rob talked about of developing your HACCP plan, you are doing that irrespective of who's actually doing the verification or the reviews.
Okay. And then this one comes in from Montana, but a lot of states has the poultry exemption that they have, that if you only process 1,000 birds or whatever, you're exempt from certain things. But what would you recommend in terms of the importance of developing a HACCP plan, even on the very small scale?
No regulatory requirement. If I was pushing up against the top end of that poultry exemption, probably would have a plan in place. It doesn't take long if you're like very specific to that under the poultry exemption. If you're a backyard guy and you're like personally, I might sell 100 birds a year to neighbors. I don't have a HACCP plan for those. But if I had 1,000 birds or more and I was working at, like I said, at the limits of the exemption, I probably would have a plan, but there's not a regulatory requirement for it. Part of that is it's if you have some records and you show that you're doing things right, and if there was an issue further down, that could be a help in your defense, with your insurance, those sorts of things. So that's the reason you might want to put a food safety plan in under those sorts of exemption things. If you're working under a retail exempt, your local food code or your health district may require HACCP plans. That's pretty common as well. But that's my sense is, if you're doing a couple dozen, no big deal. If you are supplying a restaurant down the road, or you're really pushing the limits of the exemptions, I'd probably put together a food safety plan with some simple things. What are you doing to ensure chilling? What are you making sure your water is clean, potable? Those sorts of things.
That would really come into risk management. And are you willing to bet your farm over a couple hundred birds? Because if you make somebody sick or kill somebody, you could lose that farm. So, risk management comes into play when you think about these things as well.
Absolutely. So you've talked about record keeping quite a bit, and I'm old school. This is how I like to keep records. But what are some of the resources that are out there? What can help people through with their record keeping and to be able to have that documentation?
I'd say utilizing any resources that you can. So the MPPTA network was built through USDA to provide assistance for meat processors. So we're all available and ready to help when needed to review that documentation. University professors, university outreach, local extension offices, etc. That just always having an extra set of eyes on the record keeping and the documentation in your process is incredibly valuable. Going back to what I said in the beginning was that if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So if you do not have a strong record keeping system in your establishment, you're going to be looking at some headaches as well. Might be not being able to prove safety of product for 3 years. I had to do a recall of a company that just did not have their CCP records appropriate for their cooked products. So they had to pull back 3 years of product. So always just having an extra set of eye on those records is incredibly valuable. And it almost seems like in this day and age, the more records, the better. But you have to balance that with personnel. You have to balance that with, we don't need anybody walking around with a clipboard all day, every day. So, again, good risk management there, that the more records you have, it seems to be better. But there's a way that we are able to combine information as well to limit those as much as possible. So I'm saying two things there. I know I am, but it's really situation dependent and really important to focus on the specific process and hazards at hand.
And there are some tools out there. Most of the big companies have their own proprietary record keeping kind of software systems and things like that that allow them to document those things. But again, and even in some of those cases, nothing beats the old-fashioned pen and paper and actually having signatures on many of those things. And a lot of the smaller plants can't afford those proprietary platforms. And so the pen and paper. The one thing I will say about records is keeping your records neat and organized and accessible. Because if for some reason, again, and this goes to Rob's point, it is very important to establish and build a rapport and a working relationship with your inspector. But inspectors are human. Inspectors get sick, and they'll send a replacement inspector to your plant. And that inspector may want to see all of your records. They want to see what you did for the last couple of weeks because they have no clue. Right. And so if you're like, well, my John doesn't ever ask for the records, or he gives me 2 days before he asks for the records, or before I have to deliver, and there's a new inspector there. Each inspector is their own individual person. They have autonomy to enforce. They have the regulatory authority to enforce. And so having that system, irrespective of who you think may review those, you never know when a district manager may pop in, when your inspector supervisor may pop in, any of those folks, where there's an FSA audit, where you need to have those records. So again, in my experience, having neat, organized records helps those things go a lot easier and smoother. When you're shuffling through papers and trying to find a record of what you cooked, a month ago, it just starts to open up yourself for more scrutiny. And so again, whether that's a notebook, a binder, a clipboard, something that is chronologically organized or some type of way by lot or whatever, it is going to help you. So again, it helps you on the day-to-day, but then going back to kind of this theme of risk management, it covers your butt for however long. And again, understanding that you have to be able to produce those certain sets of records immediately, and then with the others within 48 hours or so. So again, you got to have a certain number of time frame of records on site, and then have to be able to produce records from previous years as well. And so having some type of organized system and repository and backups. And so what that means, scanning stuff in, because we work in meat processing plants, and that's a lot of water and dust and fat and grease and things like that. And so again, if it's covered in blood and grease and things like that, and you say, oh, my signature is on there, can't you see it? And they have the authority to say, no, I don't see it, so it didn't happen. So again, figuring out some redundancies, but really an organization scheme is I think top of your priorities.
Great. So got a couple more questions we'll try and get to here before we wrap up. But Sarah, this is a good one. What's a reasonably-ish rate to pay for a HACCP consultants to help you with a plan?
I'll jump in. The first thing you should do is get a hold of us because we're free. And I'm sure that's what Chris and Dave are going to say. We got expertise to get you a long way down the road. They can get, I do to this because I've done a lot of it in my life. It can get expensive in a hurry. I will throw you a number out. if you're gonna start with nothing, the first plan is, I've seen 6,000 to 7,500 bucks to get the first plan done. And then if you need another plan, it's probably incremented like 1,500 to 2,000. You could be in for 10, 15, $20,000 if you wanted somebody to do your whole food safety in a big hurry, especially if you're gonna bring somebody on site. And if you're gonna do remote things, you know, a food safety consultant's 150 bucks an hour, and just lay it out there. That's pretty common, 1,200 bucks a day. And so, 5 days to write a HACCP plan, there's your $6,000. So that's why we are here. So that's why you
Let
gotta
me,
have
yeah,
Indeed, Darius, and a whole bunch of other people in the network uh, to get you a long way down that road. So I don't know, maybe Abby and Darius have seen some different rights, but that was in north central, north part of the country. That's pretty standard. It's about 5 days at $1,200 a day to get the first plan knocked out, and that'd be all the prereq. Be getting, make sure your GMPs, SSOPs, product prescription, everything are done as properly as well.
And it's one of those things, again, we are here for technical assistance and can help as much as possible, but it's one of those things that to the point we've been talking about, is it one of those things you want to shortcut or cut corners on? So because you can get you can go the cookie cutter approach, which we're not advising. You can get somebody who may have taken a cookie cutter and tried to adapt it to or you can get a real professional. And so some of those rates that Robert that Rob is talking about are based off of reputable folks who have some history and some reputation and things like that. So you kind of got to decide, do I want the low ball approach, or do I want to pay for something that again is going to hopefully be part of my company's culture and help me to stay out of regulatory trouble into the future.
yeah, let me just punctuate what you guys just talked about, because the technical assistance program that we're all part of, as Chris said, I like to say we're here for the long haul. We're on board at least through the end of December 2026. And, a lot of folks have looked at our network as being, these are the folks that help you find grants or to prepare to submit a grant. But our scope of work with USDA includes technical assistance on your facilities and your processes and your business plans and all of that. So, we're here to help. The only thing you don't get from our network is an invoice. And so, that's a great place to start. And then there's,
I
go
wanted
ahead,
to add
Chris.
one more thing too, Dave, before we run out of time, is even when you're paying somebody to do your HACCP plan, you need to be involved. Do not write them a check and expect to get it in the mail or an email and then you're home free, because you have to be part of that plan and you have to be vested in that plan and willing to manage it every day. So even if you pay someone to write a section or the whole plan, review it, be a part of it, buy off on it, make sure that you and your staff can manage it every day. So we see that a lot.
So, yeah, and as we wrap up and we talk about the resources, and Joshua put in here that, many states have grant programs that can help you. So, look to your state to see if there might be some assistance there. That's a great suggestion. But I know, Abby, you talked about the work that AMP is doing to update your templates. Just speak to that very briefly.
Sure, yeah. So our templates for our AMP members have been online for, I don't know, 10 years or so now. They have not been updated in that time frame, and there's a lot of methodology and thought process and science that has changed in that time frame. So we've worked hard to update these plans, and like I made reference to, Rob and Derek are both part of that active network that's going to help review these plans. And the goal, the idea is to have these available to our membership at the end of the year. Online and available by December. So that's the goal. Again, we try and make them as robust as possible, but there's still going to be some legwork to be done on the plant level.
Rob, AMPSA just launched the Meat Locker website, and I mean, not just for food safety, but just tell folks a little bit about the resources that are available in the Meat Locker.
Yeah, we take a lot of our technical resources that we already had available at AMSA, as well as we're linking into the universities, our other partners, whether it's the niche meat processors, Tuskegee, AMP, that's publicly available, trying to put it all into a place where people are easy to find technical, scientific, practical information about meat processing. And we're going to build this thing out for the next couple of years. So if you want to check it out, yeah, meatlocker.org. And there's a request in there as well. If you see a topic that you don't think is covered, let us know, and we'll find the people to make the resource. A lot of short one-pager sort of things on how to get things done quickly in a meat processing facility.
Right. And Darius, I know Tuskegee's putting together a lot of resources, and one thing I'll let you promo a little bit is you're going to be hosting one of the meat summits coming up here early next year. So let folks know about that real quick.
Yeah, the Black Belt Meat Summit is going to be hosted in April of next year. And so that'll be hosted at Tuskegee University. And we kind of have been talking, and there's a lot of excitement around that. One of the things that we actually will be doing is HACCP Live. And so as part of that HACCP Live experience, it's going to be, again, kind of bringing that walk the floor concept and walking through a HACCP plan. A lot of times with the HACCP certification courses, you're sitting in a classroom and you're looking at paper. But again, one of the things that we want to do as part of that Black Belt Meat Summit is actually walk the plan through either our facility. We actually have some mobile units that'll be coming, as well as Auburn's facilities, which are right up the street. And so we're excited to bring that kind of HACCP to life by actually doing the walk through the flow charts and kind of doing plant biomapping and where harborage points and all those type of things are that people need to take into consideration. So definitely a HACCP component to that summit, but we're looking forward to having that summit next April.
Right. Well, I know we're up to time here. I know there's a few questions here. We'll try and get to those with you here, but yeah, Nicole is putting up the contact information for the folks that were with us today. Don't hesitate to reach out to them or to Chris and myself. And I'll just do a little bit of a promo. HACCP is one aspect of your risk management strategy. And, over the last year, we've seen plants devastated by tornadoes or impacted by fire and the like. So next month, we're planning on having a roundtable to talk about other aspects of risk management in meat processing, meat and poultry processing. And then in October, I'm going to screw up the actual name here, but it's essentially October is Women in Small Business Month. And we're going to be hosting a podcast that's going to feature some of the women that are doing some really innovative things in the meat processing space. So please stay tuned for those. And Chris, I'm going to let you bring it home. Is there anything we've overlooked here?
I know there's some questions we didn't get answered, but please, we'll get those answered and get them back to you by email. You're also welcome to email us directly. You probably have a pretty good idea who will answer each question that you wrote if we didn't get to it. But thank you all for joining us. We're so happy that you all are here today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.